Carmen, welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this. To start with, can you just tell us a little bit, for people who haven't met you on my other podcast, about where you're based, your studio, the basics?
Okay, well, I am based in Pennsylvania in the United States. But if you hear my voice, you're probably surprised by that because obviously I'm not from Pennsylvania. I grew up in Oklahoma, and that's where I had most of my musical learning. So I have a studio of about 25 students. And then, of course, I am on the Vibrant Music Teaching team.
Yeah, so
So,
you've got a good
very,
mix of stuff happening.
oh,
Okay, well,
yes.
let's take it back to a part of your life I don't know as much about, which is what it was like growing up and learning piano. So were you a steady practicer? Were you a bit up and down? What was that experience like?
Well, probably the first thing to know, which affects what my answer there is the fact that I have a horrible memory. But I'm an impression rememberer. And so, as far as practice goes, I honestly cannot remember I definitely did not have a regular routine. No. But I do remember, particularly in middle school, when I was in band, my mother telling people that I practiced quite a bit and that I was disciplined about practice. And I can remember at the time being like, really? Am I? And so maybe I did practice more than what I actually remember. And maybe that is why I don't remember, because practice probably was not a big event, right? I
Mm.
probably did practice fairly regularly. Therefore, I don't remember
It wasn't a big
practicing.
deal.
It wasn't a
Yeah.
big deal. Yeah, it was just what you did.
Yeah, it sounds like you probably weren't having fights with your parents about practice then, because that would have stuck out in
Mm,
your memory if it was like a big, contentious issue in your house or
mm.
something. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Probably the only contention there would have been, "Hey, I'm trying to watch TV and you're playing the piano right now." That would have been the only thing, or playing your saxophone, because that's what I did
Yeah.
in middle school. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think motivated you to practice when you did practice? What do you think was the biggest motivator for you?
Music was something that good at from the time I was very little. And so I would have been motivated to practice by the fact that I got lots of positive reinforcement for it, right? Oh, you're so talented. Oh, you sing so pretty. Oh, wow, you're good at that. And so that would have been probably the biggest motivation for me, was just the fact that there was a lot of positivity around music for me.
Yeah. So almost extrinsic motivation to start with, at least.
Sure. Oh, yeah. With just that, when you have something in your life that you kind of seem to have an affinity for, and you have people in your life who are like, oh, wow, you're good at that, then you're like, oh, well, then whew, I should keep doing that. I
Yeah.
must, that must be my thing. Let's do it. And so extrinsic from the relational
Mm.
aspect of it rather than any sort of reward. Because certainly there was not any incentive program
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah, but it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy because like
Hmm.
people are seeing you as the musician kid and therefore
Mhm.
they compliment you on that and therefore you're like, well, I guess I'm the musician kid. I better practice and keep learning
Absolutely.
new stuff. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you remember anything about how your teacher tracked assignments, like whether you had a practice notebook or anything like that?
I actually do remember that. So in grade school, my teacher used a stenographer's notebook. Do you know what that is? It's like the 5x7 with the spiral at the top. And so she would write notes in there, and she would write notes about what the assignment was and anything that specifically needed to be worked on, like count. I still remember the conversation we had about how, I had to actually count the notes. And it was like, oh my gosh, okay. So it's not enough to just know that a dotted quarter note is 3 beats. I have to actually like count those beats out, which seems so silly. And then when I got older, when I got to middle school, my saxophone teacher we just kind of marched through the book. So he really didn't write anything down because it was just whatever was next in the book. He might write notes on the page itself, and he had lovely penmanship, by the way. And then high school, I went back to piano lessons. And yes, I am old enough to have lived in a world without post it notes. And so in high school, my teacher discovered post it notes, and it was like they had dropped out of heaven. He was
Oh.
so into the post it notes. So he would, write notes on the post its and then put it on the page, which was nice and not nice. But yes, then I didn't have to erase things when it was time to go to contest or whatever. But mostly notes were specific things to work on.
Yeah.
Lift
Yeah.
your wrist here, or don't forget about that crescendo there, or, things of that nature.
Yeah. It's an interesting point about, though, you suddenly realizing that you were supposed to count the rhythm, because that's the exact kind of thing that happens, that like teachers just, they assume it's given
Mhm.
knowledge. They just assume that, obviously I've told you it's three beats. So you're supposed to count the
Right.
three beats.
Right.
But like, how would you know? I
Oh,
just
yeah.
thought I was supposed to be able to tell you that it was three beats.
Right? Because that was all the required knowledge before was, yeah, I know what that note is. Well, but you don't play that note correctly. Yes, it is interesting. It's so funny to me that that is such a vivid memory in my mind because, yeah, it was like mind blowing.
Yeah.
Oh. And I mean, like, it was a pivotal moment in my musical journey. Suddenly, I was good at rhythm because I counted, so
Yeah.
silly.
Well, I heard a story of a teacher, completely anonymous, because I don't even know her name, so I'm not shaming anyone, but she was getting teacher training. And one of the things that came up was she didn't know that you were supposed to count notes. So she
Wow.
had her students going in for exams and things, and all the comments would come back, lovely, but you need to work on the counting. And she had no idea what they were talking about.
Ooh,
We need to say these things explicitly so that they don't go on and think they're fabulous and become a teacher and not be able to count rhythms.
indeed. Man, that's fascinating.
Yeah,
Wow,
amazing.
it is amazing. And I mean, I am definitely a proponent of like some rhythms to me are just naturally felt. Like I
Mm.
do feel like to some extent syncopation, actually like spelling out the counts muddies the waters for me, right? Like, and I know that that's a horrible, horrible example that people would be like horrified by
Well,
that.
no, I think there's arguments for both directions. I don't think it's ever
Mm,
horrifying. I think sometimes you need to have both angles to it, and we
mm,
all naturally lean one way or the other. Like I
right.
lean the analytical way. Like as a student, I wanted to know exactly what fractions of beats everything was so that I could figure out where it lined up mathematically and what the common denominator was and all of that, which is like
Mm,
way too analytical. That's not helpful either. So both sides are good to know about.
yes. Oh, I agree. I think you have to have both for sure.
What about now? Is the way that you approach practice with your students similar or different in some ways to how you were taught?
Yeah, probably both. I definitely write very specific notes. You need to work on this, you need to work on that, and all of those kinds of things. But I definitely approach practice in a really different way. Like, I do feel like as I was growing up, number of minutes would have been the thing. Like, I remember in middle school having a card where I had to write the dates and the number of minutes I practiced. And so that was what you did back then. And 30 minutes of practice a day was the order of the day. That's what you did. And I'm sure I never made that, but that was what was expected. And now I emphasize with my students consistency and habit. Even if you only sit down at the piano for 10 minutes and get something accomplished, like I really try to emphasize that. I mean, if you improve on this one thing, and that's the
Mm.
only thing you get done during your practice time, that was a good practice time. And so I definitely do that, which is really different. I think the concepts of deliberate practice, and certainly for myself, interleaved practice, which I do try to encourage them to do, but I have very few of them that have learned to embrace the joy that is interleaved practice.
Yeah. Look, I don't think it's for many beginners, and it's not
Right.
for every even advanced student, but it kind of,
Mhm.
we can increase
Yeah.
those numbers maybe as they go up the levels, but they have to have a
Mhm.
certain level of almost introspection, like a level of self-awareness to be able to
Yeah,
think through that. So it does take some maturity.
totally. But yeah, so I definitely approach it differently than it was approached for me. Yeah, just so many ways. There's just so much more research around it than there was when I was growing up. Yeah, so and kids are taught differently at school than I was. And so as a teacher, I have to make adjustments to fit the style to which they've become accustomed as
Yeah.
far as learning goes. So yeah, it's definitely different.
Yeah, we have to almost fit in with what education means to them. Like it's not the same
Mhm.
picture that we have maybe from our own childhood. So that's a good point. Okay, final
Mm.
question. Can you share just one favorite practice strategy or tactic or game, something you love to do with students?
Well, you already know what I'm going to say because we've had this conversation so many times. Yeah, I love me some practice plays, and so I do crossing the river a ton. We definitely I have all kinds of fun little gadgety things to help them move the hedgehog from one side to the other, the pizza eraser from one side to the other, the whatever, what have you. I do think that, I guess, probably the reason that I use that so much is because it is easy for them to understand. It's a very, and it's quick. We can do it in the lesson. They can easily take it home without tons of explanation from me. So I do use that a lot. And then the other thing I do, kind of on the same level, is chunking up their pieces. And I really try to get them to do, I call it the 1, 2, 3 practice routine, like one line for 2 minutes, kind of three times in a row. I don't remember what the third one is, but yeah. But yeah, I definitely, try to get the repetitions in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the crossing the river is essentially a repetition with a simple goal. So you're training them in exactly what you were talking about before, that it's like
Hmm.
goal orientated or like outcome orientated rather
Hmm.
than minutes in. It's what
Right.
are we getting from it? Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Definitely recently been considering the idea of repetitions. And between like what you talked about at the Turbo Boost and what I heard Noah Kageyama talk about at the pedagogy seminar, and just that it is more about the number of repetitions that you can get in to the time frame than the time spent. I think that's something that's easy to for kids to wrap their brains around.
Yeah,
Time
exactly.
time is abstract, right? And especially for kids. 10 minutes sounds like forever to them. But if you say, "But why don't you try playing this 5 times?" "Oh, okay, I can do that. I have 5 fingers." Right? So
Yeah. And it feels like they're almost in control of when it's over. Whereas when it's
mhm.
against a clock, it feels like that's just a grown up thing that they have no control over it. Do you know what I mean? That's just like what my mom makes up about when we're done with things. I don't,
Mhm.
that's not something they have ownership over. So, yeah.
Oh, that's a great point.
Okay, I love that. Thank you so much, Carmen, for sharing a bit about your experience with practice.
All right, thanks.